The worst thing about being a park ranger isn't the isolation. It's not the harsh weather, the wildlife encounters, or even the occasional lost hiker who treats you like their personal Google Maps. No, the worst thing is that feeling that creeps in around your third year on the job, the unsettling awareness that you're never truly alone in the wilderness. My name is Daniel Keller. I've been a ranger at Blackwood National Forest for 7 years now. What I'm about to share happened during my 4th summer here, and I've spent the year since trying to make sense of it. I still haven't. I should clarify that I love my job. There's something sacred about protecting these old-growth forests that predate human civilization. Normally, the solitude recharges me. My little ranger cabin sits at the edge of the northwest quadrant, about 12 miles from the nearest paved road. The area sees fewer visitors than the main tourist sections, which is precisely why I requested it. It was early June when things began to change. Summer had arrived suddenly that year, chasing away a cold, wet spring. The forest erupted in vibrant greens practically overnight. Moisture hung heavy in the morning air, and mist clung to the valley floors until midday. My routine patrol took me along the Raven Ridge Trail that morning. Nothing seemed unusual at first. Birds called overhead, and I cataloged the fresh growth of ferns and wildflowers, mental notes for my ecological report. Then I noticed the silence. It happened so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint exactly when the birdsong had stopped. One moment the forest was alive with sound, the next, I was walking through a vacuum. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. I've experienced this phenomenon before, usually when a predator is nearby, causing wildlife to go quiet. But this felt different. I scanned the surrounding trees, expecting to spot a bear or mountain lion. Nothing. Just endless trunks stretching into green darkness. Yet the stillness persisted. My radio crackled, making me jump. Northern Quadrant, this is base. Radio check, over. It was just Sarah from dispatch doing her routine checks. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Base, this is Northern. Reading you clear, over. Any issues to report? I hesitated. What would I say? The forest got quiet and it spooked me. I'd never hear the end of it. Negative, base. All normal up here. Roger that. Next check-in at 1400. The radio fell silent, and the forest remained the same. I continued my patrol, the unease following me like a shadow. By the time I returned to my cabin that evening, I'd convinced myself it was nothing, just my imagination working overtime after a long winter season. That night, I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m. The red numbers of my alarm clock burned in the darkness as I tried to identify what had disturbed my sleep. Then I heard it again, a sharp crack outside, like a heavy branch breaking under significant weight. We get black bears frequently enough that I keep my trash locked in a bear-proof container and my windows secured. I reached for my flashlight and peered through the blinds. The full moon illuminated the clearing in front of my cabin. Nothing moved in the silver light. The trees stood motionless, no wind disturbing their branches. I was about to return to bed when movement caught my eye at the forest's edge. It wasn't a bear. A figure stood partially obscured by a large pine. Even in the moonlight, details were difficult to make out, but the shape was unmistakably bipedal and tall, taller than any person I'd ever seen. For several minutes, it remained completely still, as if observing my cabin. I found myself holding my breath, afraid that even the slightest sound might draw its attention more directly. Then, with deliberate slowness, it retreated into the darkness of the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally broke, I conducted a thorough search of the area. The ground was still soft from recent rain, but I found no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate anything had been there at all. I radioed my supervisor, Jim Blackwood, who had been managing these forests for over 30 years. Probably just a particularly tall hiker who got turned around, he suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. We've had a few reports of someone camping illegally in the restricted areas. I'll send Ryan over to help you check it out tomorrow. That day passed uneventfully, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as I went about my duties. Ryan arrived the following morning, and we spent the day searching the surrounding 5 miles for any sign of unauthorized camping. We found nothing. People have been reporting weird stuff in these woods since before they were even designated a national forest, Ryan said as we hiked back toward my cabin. My grandfather used to tell stories about the watchers in these parts. Said the indigenous people who lived here wouldn't enter certain areas after dark. You believe in that kind of thing? I asked. Ryan shrugged. I believe there's a lot we don't understand about these old places. 7 years of ranger training doesn't prepare you for everything these woods might contain. That night, alone again in my cabin, the noises returned. Not just broken branches this time, but a rhythmic tapping on the exterior walls. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. It moved from one side of the cabin to the other, as if something was circling my home, testing for weaknesses. I grabbed my service weapon, something I'd never had to use outside of training, and my most powerful flashlight. Heart pounding, I flung the door open and swept the light across the clearing. Nothing. The tapping had stopped the instant I opened the door. The night air was cool against my face as I slowly circled the cabin, gun ready. I found no evidence of anyone or anything having been there. No footprints in the soft earth. No disturbed vegetation. Nothing. Sleep eluded me that night, and the next, and the next. Dark circles formed under my eyes. My colleagues noticed my deteriorating condition during radio check-ins, but I brushed off their concerns. How could I explain what was happening without sounding like I was losing my mind? A week after the first incident, I found something that made my blood run cold. I was checking the motion-activated wildlife cameras we had set up throughout the forest. Most contained typical footage, deer, coyotes, the occasional bear. But camera number 17, positioned about a mile from my cabin, had captured something else. The timestamp read 2:43 a.m., 3 nights earlier. At first, the frame showed only the empty forest path. Then a figure moved into view. The infrared imaging gave it a ghostly appearance, but the dimensions were all wrong. It was extraordinarily tall and thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its face was turned away from the camera, but I could see it was carrying something. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The figure was dragging what appeared to be a large animal carcass. A deer, perhaps, though it was difficult to be certain. The creature paused directly in front of the camera, as if suddenly aware it was being recorded. Slowly, it turned its head. The image quality wasn't good enough to make out clear features, but something about the face was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The proportions, the angles, they didn't make anatomical sense. The footage ended abruptly, as if the camera had malfunctioned. I immediately downloaded the file and radioed Jim. This was evidence. Proof I wasn't imagining things. Jim arrived within hours, his weathered face grave as he viewed the footage. I've been managing these forests for 3 decades, he said quietly. There are things I've seen that I can't explain. Things I've heard that have no rational source. He looked up at me, his eyes shadowed. There was an incident in 1994. Another ranger, good man named Thomas West, found his cabin empty one morning, coffee still hot on the stove. They never located him. Are you saying? I'm saying be careful, Daniel. Some colleagues and I have been compiling reports of unusual occurrences in these forests for years. The authorities dismiss most of them, but we know better. He handed me a folder labeled simply Incidents, Blackwood NF, 1973 present. Inside were dozens of reports, unexplained disappearances, strange sounds, unidentifiable tracks, and multiple sightings of unusually tall figures at forest edges. That night, I double-locked my doors and windows. I placed my service weapon on the nightstand and, for the first time since ranger training, positioned a hunting knife under my pillow. The forest beyond my window seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Around midnight, the radio crackled to life. At first, I heard only static, then a voice broke through, distant and distorted. Help, Cabin 6, they're outside. I recognized Ryan's voice immediately. Cabin 6 was about 4 miles east of my position. I grabbed the radio. Ryan? Ryan, do you copy? What's happening? More static, then, watching, tall, Jesus, they're trying to get in. The transmission cut off abruptly. I tried repeatedly to re-establish contact, with no success. I called base, but the overnight dispatcher hadn't heard anything from Ryan's position. Protocol dictated waiting until morning for non-emergency situations when night navigation was involved, but this clearly qualified as an emergency. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, first aid kit, weapon, and headed out into the darkness. The forest felt alive around me in a way I'd never experienced before, each shadow concealing potential threats. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, leaving me dependent on my flashlight's narrow beam. The journey to Cabin 6 took nearly 2 hours, much longer than it would have in daylight. As I approached, I saw that the cabin was dark. No lights shone from within. The door stood partially open, swinging gently in the breeze. "Ryan?" I called, weapon drawn. "Forest Service." "Ryan, you in there?" Silence. I swept my flashlight across the cabin interior. Nothing seemed disturbed. Ryan's coffee mug sat on the table. His logbook lay open, the last entry noting a routine patrol of the eastern ridgeline. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of what might have prompted his panicked radio call. Then I noticed something on the back wall. Words, scratched deeply into the wooden planks. "They have been here always. They are watching." The handwriting wasn't Ryan's. I'd seen his neat script in logbooks for years. These letters were jagged, desperate, almost animalistic in their execution. I backed out of the cabin, every nerve ending firing warning signals. The forest had gone completely silent again, that unnatural stillness that had preceded my first strange encounter. My flashlight beam caught something at the tree line, a flash of movement, then stillness. I raised my light higher. There were 3 of them. Tall, impossibly thin figures standing motionless among the trees. They made no move toward me, but I could feel their attention like a physical weight. I'd like to say I acted with professional courage, that I confronted them or attempted communication. The truth is, I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and those watching figures as possible. I didn't stop until I reached my cabin, lungs burning, legs trembling. I barricaded the door and windows, then huddled in the center of the room, weapon trained on the entrance until dawn broke. In the morning light, everything seemed normal again. I radioed for emergency assistance, reporting Ryan as missing. Within hours, a search party had assembled. They found nothing at Cabin 6 besides that strange writing on the wall. Ryan himself was never located, despite weeks of searching. The official report cited animal attack as the most likely explanation, noting that mountain lions had been spotted with increasing frequency that season. The strange words carved into the wall were attributed to previous vandalism. The Forest Service quietly transferred me to another district the following month, citing psychological strain. I've been at my new post for 3 years now. It's closer to civilization, with regular tourist traffic and multiple rangers on duty. I'm never alone here. But sometimes, when darkness falls, I wake to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. And I know they found me again. The thing about working as a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains is that you're never truly alone. The forest breathes. It watches. And sometimes, it keeps secrets that should never be uncovered. My name is Daniel Murray. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountain National Park for nearly 11 years now. Most of that time has been peaceful, beautiful, even. But what happened during my 3rd season stationed at Cades Cove still haunts me, still makes me check the locks twice at night, still causes me to start at unexpected sounds in the darkness. I should clarify that what I'm about to share isn't some campfire tale designed to frighten tourists. These events, while sometimes dismissed as exaggerations, are documented in Park Service records. Names and specific locations have been altered out of respect for those involved, but the essence remains true. Cades Cove is one of the most visited areas in the park, a lush valley surrounded by mountains, with historic buildings scattered throughout. By day, it's picturesque. Families drive the 11-mile loop, take photos of deer grazing in open fields, and explore old homesteads. By night, when the tourists leave and darkness settles over the valley, it becomes something else entirely. It started in late October, just as the fall colors were beginning to fade. I was assigned to do the final sweep of the cove at dusk, making sure no visitors remained before closing the gates for the night. It was routine, I'd done it hundreds of times. The sky had turned that peculiar shade of purple-gray that comes just before true darkness, and a light fog was rolling down from the mountains. As I drove slowly around the loop, I spotted what appeared to be a hiker about half a mile ahead, walking along the road's edge. This wasn't entirely unusual. Sometimes people misjudged the time it would take to complete a trail and ended up rushing back to their vehicles. I accelerated slightly to catch up and offer them a ride back to the parking area. But as I approached, something felt off. The figure seemed to move with an unnatural gait, almost gliding rather than walking. And when my headlights should have illuminated them clearly, they appeared instead to absorb the light somehow. I slowed the truck to a crawl, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The figure stopped moving. Then, very deliberately, it turned to face my vehicle. I couldn't make out features, just a dark silhouette against the gathering night. But I felt with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at me. Not at my vehicle. At me. Then it was gone. Not ran off, not stepped into the woods, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. I sat there for several long moments, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Fatigue, shadows, tricks of the light, all the usual explanations we comfort ourselves with. I completed my sweep without further incident and locked the gates behind me, writing nothing in my report. After all, what was there to say? 3 nights later, I was on evening patrol again when my radio crackled to life. "Base to Murray, come in." It was Sandra, who coordinated communications from headquarters. "Murray here. Go ahead. We've got reports of a stranded hiker near the cable mill area. Claims their friend went missing about an hour ago. Can you respond?" I acknowledged and headed toward the historic grist mill. When I arrived, I found a young woman, early 20s, visibly shaken, huddled on a bench outside the old building. She introduced herself as Beth and explained that she and her boyfriend Kevin had been taking photos of the sunset when Kevin decided to walk just a little further down the path for a better angle. He went around that bend," she pointed with a trembling hand, "and never came back. I called and called. When I went to look, there was no sign of him. It's like he just vanished." I radioed in her report and began searching the immediate area with my flashlight while we waited for backup. The path Beth indicated led toward a small wooded area that separated the mill from the next historic structure on the loop. It wasn't dense forest, maybe 100 yards of trees at most, and certainly not somewhere an experienced hiker could easily get lost. As I swept my light across the tree line, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. Standing just within the edge of the woods was a figure. The same figure, I was certain, that I had seen nights before. Still featureless, still unnaturally still, and still somehow seeming to look right into me despite having no discernible face. "Hello?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt. "Park Service. Identify yourself." Nothing. No movement, no response. I drew my sidearm, something I'd rarely had cause to do in my career, and advanced slowly. "Sir, I need you to step out where I can see you." The figure remained motionless for another moment, then stepped backward, deeper into the trees, never turning away from me. I pursued, calling out again. But after just a few steps into the woods, it was gone. What I found instead turned my confusion to horror. Kevin's camera lay on the ground, the display still illuminated. Beside it was his backpack, seemingly untouched. Of Kevin himself, there was no sign, no tracks leading away, no signs of struggle. Just his belongings, abandoned in the middle of nowhere particular. The search for Kevin lasted 3 days before being scaled back. No trace of him was ever found. Beth's statement and mine were recorded, filed, and eventually forgotten by all except those directly involved. The official conclusion was that Kevin had wandered off trail, become disoriented, and likely fallen into one of the many remote ravines in the park. Without a specific search area, finding remains in the vast wilderness was nearly impossible. But I knew better. I knew Kevin hadn't simply wandered off. And over the next few months, I began to research similar disappearances in the park's history. What I found disturbed me deeply. Since the park's establishment in 1934, There had been at least 17 documented cases with the same pattern: a hiker separated briefly from their group, personal items found seemingly placed rather than dropped, and no body ever recovered despite extensive searches. In each case, a ranger or witness reported seeing an unidentifiable figure in the vicinity shortly before or after the disappearance. The records were scattered through decades of incident reports, never connected until I began pulling at threads. Most were explained away as accidents, animal attacks, or even voluntary disappearances. But the similarities were too striking to ignore. I began keeping my own log, noting unusual occurrences during my patrols. Strange shadows. Electronic equipment failing in specific areas. The persistent feeling of being watched. Around this time, I met Gerald, a ranger in his 70s who had retired years earlier but still lived in the area. When I cautiously broached the subject of unexplained incidents at Cades Cove, his normally friendly demeanor darkened. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked quietly. I didn't need to ask what it was. I simply nodded. Gerald sighed heavily and told me about his own encounters during his 30-year career. He called it the Watcher A presence that had been part of local Cherokee legends long before Europeans settled the area. According to the stories Gerald had gathered from tribal elders, the entity was neither ghost nor man, but something else entirely: a keeper of balance, a collector of souls who had violated some ancient, forgotten pact with the land. The Cherokee avoided certain parts of what's now the park, Gerald explained. They believed those were thin places, where the boundary between our world and somewhere else wasn't quite solid. I thought of the figure absorbing light rather than reflecting it and shivered. "Why doesn't everyone know about this?" I asked. "Why isn't it being investigated?" Gerald laughed without humor. "Who would believe it? Even with the pattern of disappearances, there's no evidence of anything supernatural. Just coincidences that can be rationally explained. And the Park Service doesn't exactly want to advertise that people occasionally vanish without a trace. Bad for tourism." He wasn't wrong. I'd already faced skepticism when I'd tried to connect the historical cases. Winter came, and the cove grew quiet. Fewer visitors meant fewer patrols needed. I was reassigned to the Sugarlands area for the season, and for a while, I managed to push the memories of what I'd seen to the back of my mind. Then spring arrived, and with it came my return to Cades Cove and a new disappearance. This time it was a child, an 8-year-old boy who had been hiking with his family. As before, he had wandered just slightly ahead on the trail. As before, personal items were found, a small action figure placed neatly on a rock. As before, no tracks, no body, no explanation. And as before, there had been a sighting of an unidentifiable figure nearby. But this time was different. This time, I caught something on my body camera. During my search of the area, the camera briefly captured a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, except it was a cool morning. And within that distortion, for just 3 frames, was a suggestion of a form, tall, unnaturally thin, and somehow wrong in ways I can't properly articulate. When I tried to show the footage to my supervisor, the file was corrupted. Of course it was. That night, I returned to the area alone, against protocol, against reason. I'm still not sure what drove me to go back. Perhaps it was frustration at being powerless to prevent these tragedies. Perhaps it was a need to confront what had been haunting the edges of my consciousness for months. I parked at the closed gate and hiked in by flashlight. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the cove. I made my way to the location where the boy had vanished and simply waited. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The forest around me was alive with normal nighttime sounds, the hoot of owls, the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was almost peaceful. Then, suddenly, it wasn't. Every sound ceased simultaneously, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The air grew heavy, making each breath an effort. And I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. "I know you're there," I said aloud, my voice sounding flat in the dead air. "I've seen you. I know what you've been doing." Silence answered me. Then, a soft rustling from the trees to my left. I turned my flashlight in that direction and saw it, the figure, more distinct than I'd ever seen it before. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs too long and joints that bent in ways human joints don't. Its skin, if it could be called that, seemed to shift and ripple like smoke underwater. Where a face should have been was only darkness, a void that seemed to pull at my vision, making my eyes water and my head pound when I tried to focus on it. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to run. "What are you?" I managed to ask. "What do you want?" It tilted its head, a gesture so human-like it somehow made the creature even more terrifying in its wrongness. Then it spoke, not with a voice, but directly into my mind. "I am the balance." The words weren't English or any language I recognized, yet I understood them perfectly. Those who are taken have been chosen. It is the ancient way. Chosen for what? I demanded. To walk between? To see beyond. As it has always been. A series of images flooded my mind, glimpses of what I somehow knew were the missing people. Not dead, not exactly. But transformed, existing in some state or place beyond my comprehension. They are not lost. They are found. The mental connection broke suddenly, leaving me gasping and disoriented. When my vision cleared, the figure was gone. I'd like to say I continued my investigation, that I found some way to stop the disappearances or at least warn people effectively. But the truth is more complicated. My encounter left me with recurrent nightmares and a deep sense that I had brushed against something humanity wasn't meant to understand, something ancient and powerful that operated according to rules we couldn't comprehend. I requested a transfer to another park 3 months later. My official reason was family obligations, but my supervisors likely suspected the truth, that I couldn't face returning to Cades Cove day after day, knowing what lurked in its shadows. Before I left, Gerald gave me a cryptic warning: "It knows you now. Distance may not be enough." So far, he's been wrong about that. I've been at my new post for 2 years without incident. But I still catch myself looking over my shoulder at dusk. I still start at unexplained sounds in the forest. And sometimes, when I'm alone on patrol, I feel the weight of invisible eyes upon me. The thing about working as a ranger is that we're trained to protect visitors from the dangers of the wilderness, from tangible threats like bears, hypothermia, or treacherous terrain. We're not trained for the other things that might be out there, the things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. If you visit the Great Smoky Mountains, stick to the trails. Stay with your group. And if you're in Cades Cove and feel suddenly, inexplicably watched, if the air grows heavy and sounds fade away, don't look back. Just walk calmly to the nearest exit and don't return after dark. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some watchers aren't meant to be seen. And sometimes, the true horror isn't in what the darkness holds, it's in realizing that the darkness has been watching you all along. I've been a park ranger at Shoshone National Forest for 11 years. Most people think my job consists of guiding tourists, identifying plants, and occasionally rescuing a lost hiker. Usually, they're right. But what happened last October changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. It started with a routine missing persons report. A solo hiker named Marcus Delaney had set out on the Clearwater Trail 3 days prior and hadn't returned to his vehicle. His wife called it in when he missed their nightly satellite phone check-in for the second time. Standard procedure in these cases: organize a search party, establish a grid pattern, and head out at first light. My partner Dale and I took the eastern quadrant, which included a stretch of forest that had partially burned in a wildfire 5 years back. The charred trunks still stood like blackened sentinels among the new growth. Something about those trees always unsettled me, the way they seemed to absorb sound, creating pockets of unnatural silence. "This is where cell service drops completely," Dale reminded me as we started our sweep. "Radio check-ins every 30 minutes. The morning passed uneventfully. We called out Delaney's name periodically, our voices swallowed by the dense forest. By noon, we'd covered about 4 miles of difficult terrain with no sign of our missing hiker. Then I noticed something strange. The birds had stopped singing. In my experience, sudden silence in the forest means one thing: predator. Usually a mountain lion or bear. I signaled to Dale, who nodded; he'd noticed it too. We continued cautiously, scanning the tree line, when I spotted a flash of color through the trees, a red backpack propped against a fallen log about 50 yards ahead. "Over there," I whispered, pointing. As we approached, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The backpack was unzipped, its contents partially spilled onto the ground. A water bottle, map, granola bar wrappers. But no sign of Delaney. Dale keyed his radio. Base, this is Search Team East. We've located subject's backpack at coordinates. He rattled off our location while I examined the area. That's when I noticed the tracks. Not hiking boots, but bare feet. Human feet, pressing deep into the soft soil, leading away from the backpack toward a dense thicket of young pines. Dale, I called softly. Look at this. He crouched beside me, frowning. Why would he take off his boots? I shook my head. And in October? The nights dropped below freezing. We followed the barefoot prints, which grew increasingly erratic, veering left and right, sometimes circling back on themselves before continuing in a new direction. The pattern suggested confusion, or panic. About 30 yards in, I spotted something else, a second set of tracks, overlapping with the first. These were different. Still barefoot, but broader, with unnaturally splayed toes. Almost like whoever, or whatever, had made them was keeping pace with Delaney, stalking him. You see this? I asked Dale, pointing at the tracks. He nodded slowly. Could be a bear walking on its hind legs. They do that sometimes. But we both knew bear tracks, and these weren't them. The radio crackled. Eastern Team, report status. Over. Dale keyed his mic. Still following potential sign of the subject. We'll update when. A scream cut through the forest, high-pitched, definitely human, and not far ahead of us. We broke into a run, ducking branches and hurdling fallen logs. The terrain sloped downward into a ravine where the old fire had burned hottest. Down here, the trees were nothing but charcoal skeletons, their branches reaching like arthritic fingers toward the sky. We found Delaney's hiking boots neatly placed side by side on a flat rock, socks tucked inside. About 20 feet beyond that was his jacket, folded with peculiar precision. And beyond that, his pants. What the hell? Dale muttered, drawing his sidearm. That's when I saw it, a dark opening in the hillside, partially hidden by burned brush. Not a natural cave formation, but something else. The entrance to an old mine shaft. Those aren't uncommon in these mountains. The area had been heavily prospected in the late 1800s, and abandoned mines dotted the landscape, most forgotten and unmarked on modern maps. We'd been trained to avoid them, unstable support beams, toxic gases, vertical shafts that could drop hundreds of feet. But the barefoot tracks led directly inside. We should wait for backup, I said, but Dale was already approaching the entrance, flashlight in hand. Hello? He called into the darkness. Forest Service. Marcus Delaney? No answer. The radio squawked again. Eastern Team, we've lost your position. Report location. I keyed my mic. We're in a burn zone, about half a mile east of our last check-in. We found evidence the subject may have entered an old mine shaft. Requesting additional personnel. Copy that. Stay put. Backup en route, ETA 40 minutes. Dale glanced at me. He might not have 40 minutes. I knew he was right. If Delaney was injured inside, waiting could be fatal. Reluctantly, I drew my own flashlight and followed Dale to the entrance. The mine shaft was roughly hewn, timber supports blackened by the old fire but still intact. The air that flowed from the opening was unnaturally cold and carried a smell I can only describe as wrong, like wet stone and something metallic, almost like blood but not quite. 10 feet in, the daylight faded behind us. Our flashlight beams carved narrow tunnels through the absolute darkness. The floor sloped downward at a gentle angle. Water dripped somewhere ahead, the sound echoing off the walls. Delaney? Dale called again. Are you in here? His voice seemed to travel farther than it should have, suggesting a large chamber ahead. The barefoot tracks continued, now joined by several more sets of the strange, splayed prints. I don't like this, I whispered. Dale nodded, but kept moving forward. The tunnel widened into a large chamber where several mine shafts converged. Our lights couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. The air was noticeably colder here, our breath fogging in front of us. In the center of the chamber stood a circle of stones, each about the size of a human head. Inside the circle was a pile of clothing, Delaney's remaining garments, neatly folded. And on the walls. The walls were covered in handprints. Hundreds of them, pressed into the clay-like soil, some small like a child's, others larger than any human hand I'd ever seen. They seemed to glow faintly in our flashlight beams with a phosphorescent quality. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Now?" As if in response, a low hum filled the chamber, not mechanical, but almost vocal, like dozens of people humming in unison just below the threshold of hearing. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through my boots and into my bones. Dale's flashlight flickered. "Battery's new," he muttered, tapping it against his palm. "Just changed it this morn." His light went out completely. Mine followed a second later, plunging us into perfect darkness. Then the humming stopped. In that absolute silence, I heard breathing, not ours, but something deeper, slower, coming from all around us. And footsteps, light and quick, circling our position. Dale fumbled for his radio. "Mayday, mayday. Eastern team needs immediate." Something knocked the radio from his hand. I heard it clatter across the stone floor. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing what I hoped was Dale's arm and pulling him back toward where I thought the tunnel entrance was. We stumbled through the darkness, hands outstretched, bouncing off walls. Behind us, the footsteps quickened, accompanied now by a sound like dry branches snapping. Somehow, we found the tunnel and scrambled upward. I could see a faint glow of daylight ahead when Dale suddenly stopped. "What?" I gasped. "Something grabbed my boot," he said, voice tight with fear. I reached back, felt his shoulder, and pulled with all my strength. He lurched forward, free of whatever had held him, and we burst from the mine entrance into the blessed daylight. We didn't stop running until we reached the area where we'd found Delaney's backpack. Only then did I notice the long, parallel scratches running up Dale's calf, right through his uniform pants, 4 lines, evenly spaced, like fingers had dug in. The search expanded over the next 3 days. 50 people combed that section of forest. They sent specialists into the mine shaft with professional equipment and cameras. They found nothing. No sign of Marcus Delaney. The mine shaft itself extended only about 30 feet before ending in a collapsed wall of rock. No large chamber. No stone circle. No handprints. My report mentioned a possible mine shaft, the strange tracks, and our equipment failure. I said nothing about the humming, the breathing in the darkness, or the scratches on Dale's leg, which had faded to nearly invisible lines by the following morning. 2 months later, a hiking boot matching the brand Delaney had been wearing was found 20 miles away, on the opposite side of the mountain range. How it got there, no one could explain. Dale requested a transfer to Yellowstone the following spring. I've stayed on, though I never enter the burned section of forest alone. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still, I think I can hear that same humming, distant but distinct, drifting through the trees. The official report lists Marcus Delaney as missing, presumed dead from exposure or wildlife encounter. I know better. There are things in these woods that don't appear in any field guide or wildlife management course. Things that have been here far longer than us. Last week, a young couple reported seeing a man wandering naked through a remote section of the forest, his skin unnaturally pale, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. When rangers went to investigate, they found nothing but a set of barefoot prints with oddly splayed toes. I volunteered for that search. I know what those prints mean. And I know that whatever emerged from that mine wearing Marcus Delaney's face isn't him anymore. I still work these woods every day, watching the tree line, listening for the moments when the forest goes suddenly, completely silent. Because now I understand what that silence means. It's not warning of a predator passing through. It's acknowledging the presence of a master.